becoming a bestseller. And the second book, also a bestseller, The Ambition Accelerator, was published in February 2021 and includes advice from Dragon's Den star Sarah Davis and The Apprentice's Linda Plant. Sophie's The Ambition Accelerator podcast accompanies the book and includes interviews with the women featured in the book. Sophie also enjoys supporting the Northeast region and is a supporter of Northern Power Women and co-founder of City Ladies Networking. She's chair of SmartWorks Newcastle and has achieved huge success delivering the aim of doubling the number of unemployed women supported with interview clothing and coaching across the Northeast, and securing Dragon Sarah Davis as the charity's ambassador. In June last year, Sophie became a founding ambassador for Every Child Needs a Mentor. So with all of that, Sophie, I'm really surprised you got time to talk to us this morning.
I know you didn't mention that I started my PhD last week.
Oh my God, at Durham University, of course, where
yeah.
as we were discussing.
Yeah.
Oh, very good. So good luck with that. Those are 4 years I'll never get back, so I hope you enjoy.
Mine's part-time, so it's meant to be 8.
That's even better. That's 8 years.
We'll see.
But good luck with that, because I know how much hard work it is on top of everything else that you do. So just to let everybody know, I'm going to ask, for those who weren't here last week, I'm going to ask Sophie a few questions. And then at the bottom here, there's a chat box where feel free to put your questions in that. And we'll ask Sophie those towards the end of this session. So Sophie, let's, to use a term, begin at the beginning. Let's talk a little about you. Let's hear about you, your entrepreneurial journey, and I'm sure everybody would like to know about your starting point, how you started there, and how you got to where you are today.
So like maybe many of you, I didn't set out to be an entrepreneur at all, but I think I was quite entrepreneurial, quite enterprising as a small child, but just didn't really realize what it was. So I was, always having garage sales in the street, or, selling penny chews to neighbours and things like that. So I think I was quite enterprising as a kid, but then kind of went through that more traditional corporate route that was expected of me because there are no entrepreneurs in my family. So went off to uni in Leeds, wanted to be a fashion buyer way back when, and applied to the graduate scheme at John Lewis. I actually wanted to move back to Newcastle, which killed my dreams of being a fashion buyer because I realised you needed to live in London to do that. And at that point in time, that's not what I wanted to do. So went on the graduate scheme at John Lewis, ended up in London a couple of years later because I was doing pretty well on that, and ended up down in head office. Was with John Lewis for 12, 13 years. Ended up in a role responsible for graduate recruitment across the whole of the John Lewis partnership. And then the business went through the first of what has been quite a few restructures, I guess. And my role was moving out to Bracknell. If anyone knows where Bracknell is, it's quite a tricky trip from Newcastle, which is where I'd moved back to, and was commuting down to London at that point. Now, Newcastle to London is pretty intense. It's a good 3 hours. But I only did it once a week, but to then go on to Bracknell just wasn't feasible for me. So took the opportunity to leave, looked at similar roles within the Northeast. There weren't any because graduate recruitment is usually quite London centric. And also the salaries that I was looking at, I was on a great corporate salary at that point, and I was motivated by that. And I thought I can take a step back, but not a leap. And that's what I was looking at. So decided to set up my first business. I look back and I think it was a bit of a crazy moment, but very much glad that it happened. So it was a crazy moment because obviously we all know that when you're setting out with a business, you don't make much money at the beginning, or you're unlikely to make much money at the beginning. So set up what became SRS with a business partner at that point, offering services to employers and to universities in the way that you described in that intro. We worked really well together as a duo, but he decided to leave a couple of years in. And at that point, we were recruiting a team. We had a team of associates, and things just really took off actually at the point that he left. I think it's because he kind of fallen out of love with the business, whereas I still really believed that it would do well. So then that took me out to be the salesperson out and about. And I found that I was pretty good at sales and grew that business. We scaled that up, and I then sold that in 2019, and stayed on for a couple of years until the point of January this year, where I left and founded Moja. So back in startup land yet again, but with a lot of experience and knowledge, and a bit of cash to put into the new business as well.
So what do you think was the key to the factor, what the key factor was to the success of your first business? What made that successful?
I think what made that successful was the point that my business partner left. He was very procedural, which was awesome in terms of getting the foundations of that business in place. What he wasn't so comfortable with was shouting about what we did. And actually, you need to tell people what you do, especially as a service-based business. Otherwise, how do you win sales? So I started talking a lot about what we did and how we did it, and inviting people in to see what we did. And it really grew from there. So I suppose it was me putting myself out there, me sharing things often on LinkedIn and Twitter in particular. And then it's kind of snowballed from that point. So I started looking for opportunities to just be out there. So, things like the first book, that then generated opportunities where I got asked to speak at events, because I was perceived as this total expert because I was an author, right? And it feels really weird to say I'm an author, but I have written 2 books and writing the 3rd one at the moment. But yeah, that led to more opportunities. So I got offered the chance to do 2 TEDx talks off the back of that first book, and I took one of those. I got offered a column in a magazine. I was writing guest articles. So all of those sorts of things then made it super easy to get sales conversations with people, because they'd seen me somewhere. And that's that whole thing around people trusting you and hopefully liking you because they've seen you in several places. So made sales super easy, and it also created loads of fun opportunities as well. And it just grew from there.
And also, obviously, it's nice to think that all businesses develop smoothly, but you must have faced some real challenges. Obviously, you lost your co-founder early on. Any other significant challenges you face in getting to that point where, obviously, the price, the real value of success is having somebody saying, we value your business and we want to buy it?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely some challenges along the way. So 6 months into setting up that first business, I got divorced, which I wasn't planning on doing when I set the business up. At that point, I had a 2-year-old. She's now 10. And I had a really tiny income at 6 months into the business. We always took a salary because we were always profitable from the start, which is a great position to be in. But it was maybe a third of the salary that I'd been on at John Lewis, maybe even less, maybe a quarter. And of course, I had an increase in all my costs. At that point, because I was classed as self-employed, I really struggled to keep the mortgage on my house because I didn't have anything to show in terms of proper income. So that was a financial challenge. And it was just a really, anyone that's gone through divorce will know it's just a really challenging time all around. So that was rough, but I'm really glad it happened at the point that it did, because if it happened earlier, I wouldn't have taken the leap. I'd have found another role within John Lewis and not taken the leap to set the business up. But yeah, looking back, that was pretty brutal.
Yeah, and that's interesting in that obviously sometimes personal circumstances change your entire direction. And you mentioned there that potentially you wouldn't be where you are today if it wasn't for those personal circumstances.
Absolutely. I think that's it. Like I say, if that happened maybe a year before, I would have just absolutely looked to stay on in the perceived security of John Lewis at that time. So I am glad that it happened in that order. And I also am glad that I really believed in the business, because I knew that business would do well. I knew it from really, really early on. So my solution, I'm very pragmatic in my approach, was, okay, right, you haven't got much money coming in, you're going through all this emotional stuff, but actually you've got a business that you love and a daughter to provide for. So for me, it was like, right, the next couple of years are going to be tough, but I'm just going to keep my head down. And it gave me the drive that I needed to make that business successful. So it was channeling, what was quite a challenging situation and turning it around and making that business grow.
We asked this question last week of Sam White. I'm always interested to ask this because entrepreneurs come across as enormously confident vibrant, innovative, people with no self-doubt. But I wanted to ask you, as you were going through that journey, were there times where you had this self-doubt? Because obviously we're talking later about personal branding, but as you were going through building this business, were there any issues where you said, or any times where you said, this is a moment of self-doubt for me? But more importantly, how did you overcome those?
I still have those now. That never goes. And I think you're right around, we do project confidence. You have to project confidence. It's that an element of faking it till you make it, right? So, we pretended that we had an office and a huge team of staff, which we did. We had a hot desk in an office in the building that my current office is in, actually. So we had a hot desk, we had a team of associates, but yeah, we were blagging it a little bit at the beginning. And I think, anyone that doesn't do that, well, I'd be surprised if there's anyone that doesn't do that. We all do that a bit. And certainly in those early days, it was, should I just go and get a job? Is that the right thing to do? Will that provide more security? But actually, I was thinking more about the potential of the business. I knew that having my own business gave me more potential in terms of income, because that's uncapped, right? And also that flexibility. And I wanted to have the flexibility for my home life at that point. So it was, yes, self-doubt, but that never goes.
Of course. So your first entrepreneurial journey was in recruitment and employability, working in university. You came to the end of that. The business was bought, and now you've moved into personal branding, particularly for entrepreneurs. So that move, tell us, where did that idea come from?
Yeah, so anyone that sold a business will know that it comes with lots of restrictions around what you can and more so can't do. So for me, I was under an immense amount of restrictions when I exited that business and couldn't operate at all within that industry. And to be honest, I think by that point, I'd kind of been there and done that, and I was ready to try something new. I always knew that I had at least another business in me. So last year, when I started thinking about what that exit would look like, I was getting my thinking cap on and thinking, what is it that I could do next? And I think it was that reflection around what had worked so well in that business. And it was all of the, what we call personal branding. And I don't even think I called it that in my head. I just knew that there was a process that I'd followed, of things that I'd done that worked really, really well. So I did a bit of research to see what was out there. I couldn't find anything in the Northeast. There's still, in my opinion, someone might want to correct me if I'm wrong, but couldn't find anything in the Northeast at all that does what we do. I couldn't even put a label on it. So, people would say, is it a PR business? Is it marketing? And I was like, well, no, it's neither of those really. But equally, I probably wouldn't want to call it a personal branding business. So we're just an agency that get people known in their industries and beyond. And we've got a team of staff that are working within the business, and we've got some associates that we call upon for specific help with certain things. And it is a totally different move, but we've got experts in place, and my story is powerful because it worked, and we know what to do. We've since found there's a few companies doing doing personal branding, I guess, that are sort of London based, but they tend to focus more on things like social media posts and creating social media posts for people, which isn't actually something that we do. So I say that we create the substance that people can share on social media. So social media is a great medium to be able to share messages, but actually we're creating the substance that they can talk about on those channels.
And why do you think personal branding is so important, particularly for entrepreneurs? That may be an obvious question, as we say, entrepreneurs aren't slow at coming forward. But why is it particularly important? Because obviously they are the front of the business, but in the end, it is the business that actually brings the pounds and pennies into.
Yeah, I think, you've kind of alluded to it around the confidence of entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs and founders, whichever word we want to use, are passionate about what their product or service is. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it, because it's certainly not for the reward at the beginning, right? So they are the best sales people for their business. Even as they grow and they might well have a team of people doing sales, no one is going to get as excited as they do. And let's face it, people are more interesting than businesses. Even if you've got the best business idea in the world, it's the people that make it interesting. You know, when you look back through businesses, Apple's always a classic, isn't it? Right. So Steve Jobs, he was fascinating. Elon Musk, whatever you think about him, a real character, and he has got exciting businesses, to be fair, and very modern businesses, but it's him that sells that, and he could do pretty much anything now, I'm sure, and it would be successful. Or even, a more recent example, someone like Stephen Bartlett, who had great success with Social Chain and is now getting involved in all sorts of different things. I'd be surprised if any of his endeavors failed massively, because he's got the brand to put behind it. So it just works and people are interesting.
But that's fascinating, because one of the things about being an academic in entrepreneurship for 25, 30 years is that originally nobody cared about entrepreneurship. Now you mentioned all these individuals who label themselves as entrepreneurs. They are, by all measurements, entrepreneurial. But there are obviously other very successful entrepreneurs that you would argue have not labeled themselves well, have not branded themselves well. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg is a classic example. Sergey Brin and Larry Page at Google, and yet we have two of the biggest companies in the world there, with entrepreneurs that I was going to say may need your personal branding.
Maybe, but you still know their names, right? And you could probably still say some things about them. So Zuckerberg, for example, isn't he really well known for he wears the same outfit all the time, so there's certain things that we know about these people. Yes, they might be a bit more introvert, but we still know their names.
Yeah. And on that, how do you think it's evolved over the last few years? I mean, authenticity now is something that's customers and clients really value, not only in individuals, but also the businesses they run. So how has that, do you think, evolved, say, over the last 10 years?
I think it's something that's expected now. And I think we probably overuse that word authenticity, and probably a few people are sick of hearing it now. And it kind of becomes a bit contrived, where people are talking about it all the time. So then it feels a bit awkward, and it doesn't feel authentic in the way, because people are overthinking things all the time. But I think what it has done is it's encouraged people to put themselves out there a bit more. Traditionally, people have kind of, especially Brits, don't want to be perceived as being braggy about anything. They don't want to look like they're showing off, or that they're putting the spotlight on themselves. But actually, the benefits that you get from doing that are so worth feeling a bit awkward or worrying about what people think about you. And as an entrepreneur wanting to develop and grow your business, you'd be mad not to have a go and see what benefits it brings.
Yeah, it is fascinating to say. So I'll give you an example. There is two businesses in the same industry, and the first business, because I mentioned to you, I measure all the fast-growing businesses in Wales. They've been on the list 5 years running, and you wouldn't know about them, but they had enormously successful, high turnover, very profitable. And yet there's another business which has a very good brand. And over the last 12 months, the founder of that business has really put herself out there. And yet you would think, if you're saying which one is the most successful business in terms of any measurement, you'd say it's the second one. But it isn't, not yet. But it is fascinating when you have that perception of success as compared to, those that quietly get on with it and it out. So perhaps there's a balance there between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes when you're building your brand and putting yourself out there, sometimes it's a bit of a slow burn around it delivering on results. When I think back to my last business, there was a really big contract that we won, where I had kind of been on the radar of it was one of the universities. I'd been on their radar for quite a long time, but it had never been the right time for them to come on board with us. And then we were sat together in an awards bash dinner, and that was the right time. And the client said to me, you've always been on the radar. I trust you. I like what you do. And now's the right time. And we've got this massive contract that we want to work with you on. But it was a slow burn.
So you mentioned people like Steve Bartlett, and I'm trying to think how many fingers he's got. He must be have 20 on each hand for all the pies. But but who else from your experience, or people who you're working with, are doing this really well in being able to communicate a personal brand that reflects their business and what they stand for?
I think I've seen people that have dabbled in it over the years that I've thought were great at the time, but perhaps haven't. Maybe they've run out of steam, or maybe they've had some help with it and then they've stopped that help, so they've gone a bit quiet. I think one of the things is got to be consistency, and then also the dreaded authenticity word. But I think those are the two things. And I would say, someone else that I think is doing it really well, definitely Stephen Bartlett, but his colleague and our ambassador at SmartWorks Newcastle, Sarah Davies, I think she does it really well. She used to, way back when, because she's local to us, she I saw her speak at a couple of conferences years ago, and I'm talking like, God, 10 years, maybe longer ago. But she wasn't as visible at all as she is now. And obviously Dragon's Den's been a key driver for her. But what she's great at is, if anyone follows her on Instagram in particular, she's really in the moment with things. She posts great things on stories. She shares lots around her home life, but does it in a really nice way. She's not overexposing her children at all, but she's talking about the challenges of being a mum, being a business owner, all the interests that she has. And she does that in a very real way. People like her because, certainly in my experience with all my conversations with her, what she projects on social media and through her content is what you see in real life as well. So I think she would be a good one for me.
And also, the growth of social media obviously has changed everything in terms of personal branding. How much do you drive that as part of the way that you work with entrepreneurs in terms of?
Yeah, so we would be obviously encouraging people to use social media. It's a tool that's pretty much free, unless you can put some spend behind it, but it's a free tool. But the thing with it is you have to be consistent, right? So all of the platforms will punish you if you're not consistent in terms of the algorithms and where they push you out. But you've got to be sharing content that's good. So it's not just having wishy-washy posts or trying to put something that's kind of clickbaity. And that's where the service that we provide creates that content. So as some examples of content that we would encourage people to create, it would be things like a podcast. Podcast is awesome. They are very popular. A lot of people listen or watch them. You would be uploading them across various different platforms. So in terms of your SEO, great for that. So podcasts, entering awards, which I know is very close to your heart, is a brilliant way of raising your profile. Going for good quality awards, because there are some absolutely rubbish ones out there, but ones where they come with a community. I often talk about the National Startup Awards, the GBAs, as being like probably almost the best of the best, if you like, in terms of awards, because it's not just an awards night, it's that community that you then enter and being part of that. So I think that's brilliant. Things like writing a book, writing articles, speaking engagements, looking at other things that you can get involved in outside of the business. So, I chair a charity, having a charity that's aligned to what your passions and interests are as well. So there's so many, they're just a few examples, but it's all of those things, and then being able to share content from each of those across whichever social media platform you prefer.
Yeah, one of the businesses we were working with earlier this year, one of the tips that they'd given out, because they were a company that was working in the hotel industry, and they were supporting hotels in different ways with some of their offers. And what they did was actually create a blog. Now, I've been blogging since I think when Blogger came out, right? And it's great, and you get people dropping in and whatever. But it was fascinating because they had a specific strategy just to do articles on the hotel industry and hospitality that actually to do technically with their product, but drove so much traffic to their site. And all of a sudden people are going, oh, this is interesting. So have you similar examples of that?
Perfect. Yeah. So, well, I guess an example that I've had on a personal level was when I used to write, and I still do actually write for magazines or journals, and I got asked to write an article for HR Review magazine. It's a few years ago now. So I wrote an article. It was about online tests. So it was very niche, very specific. And I wrote that article, which probably took me a few hours to get my head down and write it. Then when it came out, I shared the link to that article on LinkedIn and said, hey, if you're interested in online tests, this is a great article for you to take a look at. And somebody from a very big and well-known financial services company happened to see the post, read the article, was actually looking to procure an online test and got in touch. So we were connected on LinkedIn, but we didn't really know each other. We were just connections, right? So she messages me, really would love to have a chat. Next day we have a chat. 2 weeks later, I'm down in London presenting to their whole senior management team. And within maybe a week or two of that, we'd win a 70 grand contract for the business. So, that was a really powerful example. Bit of luck in there around it being seen at the right time by the right person. But if you're not creating content like that, it's never, you've got to be in it to win it, right? So it was really, really good. And that's the kind of content that someone might well have seen, a month or two later and then come back to me.
And building on that, I mean, from your own personal experience, what's your biggest personal branding win as such? What's been
that would certainly be one of them, and I could probably reel off a number of examples where it's been a direct link to sales, and ultimately we all need the sales to grow our businesses. So they're the biggest wins, those financial wins, and I have got a number of those. I did deals through literally through emails and phone calls where they'd seen something on LinkedIn, had been in touch, and then we did the deal over the phone, and the only time I ever met them was when we went on site to deliver the job. And these were big contracts as well. They were sort of minimum 20-30 grand contracts upwards. So it was a great way to win and do business, very, very low cost. It was just my time. And then I think alongside that, it's not just the sales opportunities, it's the fun opportunities, right? Because as soon as you get a bit of exposure with things, other people see that and invite you to do other cool stuff, even now. And I'm not doing as much as I used to do because I'm doing it for other people. But even now, I get really cool invites to get involved in things. And my challenge is I want to say yes to everything. My team tell me off because they say, no, you need to just stay in the office this week and stop saying yes to everything. But I've had opportunities to go on TV. I've done live TV. I've done lots of radio. I was on the radio this morning, so if I'm looking a bit bleary-eyed, I was up at 4 a.m. doing Wake Up to Money, and I get to go on that program as a whole program guest every 2 to 3 months, and that's so fun because you're just talking about whatever's come up in the business news. So it keeps me on my toes, keeps my knowledge fresh as to what's going on in the markets and things. So it's stuff like that that's just super, super cool, and the people that you get to speak to along the way, I like having fun. It would be boring if we were running our own businesses and not having all the fun along the way. And I think this adds the variety and interest to things and gives you lots to talk about when you're networking.
Yeah, and it is fascinating taking that first step. I remember my first step when somebody asked me to do a radio interview 25 years ago on, I don't know, something like, the economy in North Wales or something like that. Oh. And actually, to use an academic term, you're bricking yourself, aren't you? Particularly when you're doing it live.
I know, pressure.
And it is, it is sometimes difficult. I mean, I'm just going to ask you a question because I haven't got this down, but have you ever corpsed on live television?
Have I ever what? Corpsed?
What
corpse, does that mean? Like,
I can't say anything. It's a TV. Where you're basically doing to get your lines.
Do you know what? I think sometimes I'm giving a response and when you just forget what the hell you were on about. But I think that happens to me in general, and I think I'm good at winging it. So I'm good at kind of recovering things. But yeah, I mean, the live stuff is super nerve-wracking because you've got one chance and that's it. But it's the adrenaline and the fun from doing it. I keep going back for more. It's great. But Yeah, I think, do you know what, when I did my TEDx, I think that was more nerve-wracking, because again, similar situation where you've got one chance and you've got an audience of people and you're being filmed and stuff. But I don't know, it keeps things exciting, doesn't it? Like, quite like that edge of the seat stuff.
Yes, I had to try and explain the Chancellor's budget and the effect on the mortgage market through the medium of Welsh at 7 o'clock in the morning last week.
Oh, I don't envy you that, I tell you.
I'm sure everybody understood it, because I certainly didn't anyway. So if you could go back in time, you know, Sophie Milliken has developed as his individual, as his person, and you've got your own personal brand, would you do anything differently?
I think probably what I would do is do the activities that I've described earlier, because I saw the benefits of those pretty quickly. And like I said earlier, it is a bit of a snowball effect with it. But I would do it earlier, and I would have encouraged my business partner at the time to do the same. I think it's that whole doubt, it's that imposter syndrome, it's that what are people going to think of me feeling. But because I've seen it work so well, and other people that I've seen that have done it well, yeah, I would just do it sooner, do more of it and do it sooner, and say yes to everything.
And coming back to that issue, I was going to mention it later, as you raised it, this whole issue of the imposter syndrome. It seems to have come very much to the fore over the last few years, that there is a lot of self-doubt, and the people, and actually maybe it's a piece of personal branding that people now are using an imposter syndrome as a way of actually saying, well, I maybe not, you know, as confident, but it then appeals to that. Have you seen this sort of phenomenon increase over the last couple of years? Or?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and I think women tend to get asked about it a bit more than men, which I find a little bit frustrating. But I think, you know, we all face it, male or female. When I was interviewing those women that were in the Ambition Accelerator, that second book, that was a question that I asked them. And you mentioned in the intro that there's a podcast that goes alongside that. The podcast was actually the interviews that I did with the women that are in the book, and it wasn't a plan to do a podcast. It was only as I was doing the interviews, I was like, hey, I could totally reuse this content as a podcast. Obviously got their permission and did that. And you'll still, it's a couple of years old now, but what they've said is really interesting. And they're really interesting women. And I asked all of them about imposter syndrome. Some of the more outspoken ones said they'd never heard of it, which I thought was really interesting to see super confident women saying, don't know what it is, never heard of it. But actually, most of them said that they had suffered from it, that they continued to suffer from it. And these are successful, often high-profile women. And I think, again, you can kind of channel it in a positive way, in the same way that you can with stress, etc. So it's being more prepared than perhaps you might be if you're going into a big meeting or something like that. And I think as well, it's making sure that you've got a great support network around you of people that get what you do. Being a founder or an entrepreneur can be very lonely sometimes if you don't have a co-founder. And quite often, certainly for me, none of my family or friends were entrepreneurs at the time. So it was really hard to offload and to share those doubts. But when I got really sort of close to a group of business friends, that made it so much easier, because they would be cheering me on when I needed it and telling me I was smashing it and giving me a bit of a boost when I was feeling low. And I think you can't underestimate the power of surrounding yourself with great people.
And that's, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, in that obviously imposter syndrome, as you say, some people hadn't even heard of it. But because of personal branding, you're doing it for the right reasons. You're trying to promote yourself, promote your business, promote what you do. Once you put your head above the parapet, then, I've been there. I tell you, I had this troll. I was trolled for 2 years by an absolute lunatic.
No way.
It happens, and it is incredible that you're always trying to be positive, but it's trying to deal really with those people who, for no reason whatsoever, would love to just drag you down all the time. And I always the challenge of any personal branding is that, and then you start doubting yourself and doubting what you stand for. I mean, I'm sure you work with entrepreneurs who are who maybe might regret taking that step and saying, because of, you know, social media is a two-edged sword. It gets you out there, but it does attract, obviously.
It really is. It really is. And I think that is most people's objection around, oh, I don't want to do it. What if I put myself out there and I have that experience? All of the people that we've worked with so far haven't had that experience. And I think your experience is unusual, and you know, it does happen, but it's you know, that hasn't happened to me, and I hope it doesn't. You know, people often say that when you get to that point, you know, you've made it, so you can look at it as a positive in that sense. But I still think, you know, you've had that experience, right? Does that, having had that, been through that experience, and I'm sure everyone watching this will be thinking, oh my God, I would hate that if that happened to me, and I would feel exactly the same. But now, having had that experience, do you regret ever doing anything that's put your name out there?
Not at all. And it's always an inevitability, isn't it? Because, you know, if the more you're out there, I mean, it was interesting. This individual never met this person, didn't know who he was. I knew where he worked. His employer, I found out by mistake. His employer basically didn't do anything about it. It was fascinating. But you know what they say: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It actually made me stronger. And he said, you know, it was obviously, it was nothing to do with me. It was nothing to do with what I was saying. It was just that individual decided to target and latch on to what I was saying, and the problem wasn't mine, it was his, unfortunately. But like you say, you know, this was a few years ago, and it's actually taught me, it hasn't stopped me saying anything, and that's the most important thing. It hasn't stopped me doing that. But yeah, maybe I should have had somebody to help me with my personal branding at the time.
Well, yeah. Well, you'd have managed it. And I think now, I think an employer would handle that differently now. I do, in that situation.
You mentioned earlier on about award programs, and obviously you've worked with us as a judge, as a sponsor, and obviously you've gone through the awards as, yourself. Just to build on what you said about personal branding, and you know, we mentioning earlier on, I've run awards in Wales for the fastest growing companies for 24 years. We've done the Startup Awards for 7 years now. And obviously we're involved, both of us involved in the Great British Entrepreneurial Awards. How important is it to do this? Just, you mentioned it briefly, but if you can elaborate a bit more, because clearly, you know, you mentioned there are good awards and bad awards. And I think that's quite important, that what you have, and if you do apply, that those are awards that your peers and your network actually see great value in.
100%. So I think, you know, in theory, it should go without saying what the bad ones are, but I think sometimes it might be a bit hard to spot them. But I guess some of the more obviously bad ones are ones where you receive an email telling you that you've won some award, and it's some random, like totally random. We get these through in the office every week, right? Sometimes multiple times during the week. Hey, Sophie's won most influential woman in the world, or something totally like random, but be some random publication. And you've won it. But you just need to pay $1,500 to be sent your trophy and have an advert in a magazine or something. That's usually what the spiel is. So, you know, things like that hopefully would be a bit obvious as a bit of a scam. Although frustratingly, I do quite often see in my feed people sharing, "Hey, I won this," and I think, "Oh God, I know where that's come from," and it's a bit cringe. So I wouldn't be doing that. I wouldn't be doing anything. There are some industry awards where you have to pay to enter. There are some. So I can think of, you know, some marketing awards, and particularly quite often have to pay to enter those. There's a couple of HR ones that you have to pay for as well, that are credible, and it's more around covering admin costs and things. So I would say whenever you're looking at entering awards, it's going onto the website, it's making sure that it's a credible website. You usually would be able to see who the judges are. So, you know, do you perceive those to be credible judges? Does their opinion and their vote matter to you? So again, that would be a tick. And looking at past winners, you know, who are they? Can you Google them and see what does Google say about them? But I love the DBAs and the Startup Awards, and I was very fortunate to win Northeast Entrepreneur of the Year back in, I think it was 20 that I won that. And, you know, I'm still riding on that Northeast Entrepreneur of the Year tag. It got me a speaking gig actually a few months ago. So, you know, it's great. And I really like the awards programs that you run, because they are, although there's a national final, they are regional. And I think, you know, most of us are very passionate about the regions that we live and work in. And it's a great way to be an ambassador for where you live.
So we've got a couple of questions that have come through so far. So for those of you who haven't put in your questions, please do so. They're coming in now. So the first one, your 2 books. So, and the third on the way. So how much time did it take you to write your book?
Oh my gosh. So it was almost 2 extremes between the 2 books. So the first book, From Learner to Earner, which is actually just literally yesterday been re-released as the 2nd edition, because it now includes virtual recruitment, because that wasn't really a thing when I wrote it, but through the pandemic it's become a thing. And even though I'm not operating in that industry anymore, I wanted to keep the book up to date because it's a good resource for students. So when I was writing that, I used a hybrid publisher, and I was saying to them, I really want to write this book for students to help them get a job. And it needs to come out in September because that's when students apply for jobs. And the publisher said to me, okay, well, we work back from that. And it means that you need to get your final manuscript to us in 3 weeks' time. And I started laughing. I was like, oh my God, 3 weeks' time, that's insane. And then I was thinking about it, and I was like, if I don't do this, I'm gonna have to wait a year to get that same window. And actually, because it was something I knew so much about, I had loads of content. I'd written blogs and articles and things, so I knew I had that content, you know, a lot of it in my head, but a lot of it written down as well. And it came at the right time of year where I could actually just take myself out and say to the team, right, I'm off and I'm concentrating on this. So that's what I did. So I did do it in 3 weeks. It was like doing 4 dissertations or something. It was pretty brutal, but I did do that, and it then allowed the time to sort of do all the checks and publish it. So that one was 3 weeks.
Were these, one of the other questions is, were these self-published or did you do it through a publisher?
So I used a hybrid publisher, which for me is the best option. So, you know, with publishing, you can go traditional publisher where you're approaching a publisher and hopefully getting a deal, or you can self-publish, or you can do something in between. I wanted to do something in between because a traditional publisher, they will shape your book. And I think as an author who's using it as kind of like almost like a business card, right? It's a tool for business development. You want to control the content of that book. Self-publishing to me was too far the other end. I wanted that professional, look and feel to it. So I went with the hybrid option. And then with the second book, I wrote that during lockdown, and that took me maybe 8 months to write because I kept losing interest because stuff was going on in the business, and it took me quite a while to write that one. It was a lot longer.
And in both cases, was it because you were interested in doing it, or was it because you wanted to build your own brand and use the book to do that, or was it a combination of both?
I think it was probably a combination of both. I knew that in that industry, and the same with this industry, with the book which I have started, which I'm hoping to get out probably in the new year. I knew that it would make me stand out within the industry because, you know, I think someone told me a stat the other day that I think it was around 50, maybe over 50% of people want to write a book, but 0.3% of people do write a book. So there's something powerful about having a book. It does make you stand out. And, you know, in entrepreneur world, we do see a lot of people writing books, but we're not kind of your normal person. And writing a book will impress a lot of people, but it's also just getting that knowledge out there. I really enjoy writing. You know, I've got a couple of columns that I write at the moment for business publications, and I find it fun. I enjoy it. I like to be able to write what I want, and yeah, I enjoy the process. So
yeah, I've been writing a column for nearly 20 years now, and I'll tell you, when you know it's got to be in for Friday,
yeah, the pressure's on,
and you've still got to write it. It's never easy. The other thing I wanted to ask you about this is that when you talk about, you know, personal branding, do you need to be careful not to be controversial or opinionated? This is one of the, okay? Or do you play it safe, or do you just be who you are?
Well, there's a line of thought that would say you should be controversial because that is going to polarize people and they'll either love you or hate you, and it will generate interest. But that could be good or bad. I think if people have strong opinions, then it's being authentic, right? If you're sharing those. But I think that definitely for me, I would, if I was advising a client, I would probably steer them away from that, because I think you are more likely to get a backlash. There are topics that you can talk about and be more controversial on, but without attracting that. I'm trying to think of some examples. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I think the key is to be authentic. If you're not the kind of person who in the office or at home is super controversial, then you don't want to create that personality online, because then it isn't authentic and it's going to be hard to maintain that. And then when you go and meet these people in real life and you're not like that, and you may be more introvert or whatever, then I think you need your online persona to match the in-person one. I would hope that anyone meeting me in real life would feel like I was familiar, because we've been connected online, and that they feel like they know me, rather than, oh, who is this person? That's not who I recognize from LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever.
And obviously, another question here: did things have changed recently in terms of perception publicly? But there's the old line: there's no such thing as bad press. But obviously, brands' morals now are becoming more and more important in reflecting that business. Have you seen that change over the last few years?
Yeah, I think there is such a thing as bad press, and I think we've seen it. If I think of some more recent examples, the Centre Parks thing, right? Recently, everyone's probably seen that, where they said they were going to close on the day of the Queen's funeral, and that anyone that was in one of their properties had to leave for the day. And they put that out on their social media, and they got absolutely blasted, and quite rightly so for that, and then did a bit of a U-turn and apologize and change their mind. But stuff like that is just bonkers. Or brands and people that just completely get it wrong and then almost ignore the fact that they've got it wrong. And I think people are, particularly humans, are human, and if you make a mistake, you need to own it and do what you can to rectify it, but without making it worse. So yeah, there's definitely something around some press being bad.
So another question here is about, obviously, the entrepreneur runs a business. So where do you think the leads and opportunities come from? Do they come from the personal branding of the entrepreneur, or the business's brand awareness, or a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. But again, going back to the stuff we were talking about earlier around usually the person being more interesting, if you go on Elon Musk's Twitter, and he's bigger on Twitter, isn't he? Because isn't he buying it rather than maybe
he'll own it in about 2 weeks. He gets everything right.
He'll own it soon. He'll own it soon. So if you were to go on his Twitter now and see how many followers he's got, it will be an insane amount. I don't know, like millions for sure. Whereas if you look at SpaceX or Tesla, yes, that will have a lot of followers, but I bet even if you add those followers together, I bet it's not as many as he has, right? Because he is more interesting, but then because of him being linked to those companies, he will help those sales. When it's a brand, it's harder to show personality, and some of them do it quite well. I mean, some of the supermarkets have been quite fun over the years on Twitter, again as an example, and being shown a bit more personality. But it's a brand. It's even if you've got various people that go on and take that over, it's still not as engaging as the individual. And I think you can have more fun and show more personality as an individual. But the ideal is you're pushing stuff out from you and also the company, and you're kind of mentioning both in each of the posts to send traffic each way.
And you mentioned Twitter there, but in your opinion, what are the most effective social media platforms of getting your message out?
I think it really depends on what your industry is. I think LinkedIn is a classic, and you'll get lots going on LinkedIn. Twitter is good for if you want to get in touch with journalists and things. Twitter is amazing for that. I'd say that's the strongest out of all of them. If you're in a creative space, then Instagram is going to be better. So it just depends. And I think there's something to be said for having a presence on each of them, or at least trying them out until you find out which one works for you. But it is a big commitment to be on all of them and to be putting stuff out regularly.
Yeah. And is it, you know, do you think it's difficult now to stand out from the crowd? If everybody's going to have this personal brand, and whereas it used to be, as you mentioned, there are a few who sort of developed it.
That's a great.
If every entrepreneur had their own personal brand, we'd have over 5 million personal brands in the UK, which makes it difficult then to stand out.
And I think that goes back to not just pushing content out on social media and not just being posts. So, you know, there's a saying around, you are what Google says you are, and Google isn't going to find all of your social media posts forever. So you lose those after a few days, really, in terms of, you know, where they're going to appear. So I think there's a lot of noise on social media. There's a lot of posts that feel similar, but where the quality comes is that content that I mentioned that is more unique to you. You know, there's not many people that have got a podcast, a book, articles, speaking engagements, award wins, all of those things. It's the quality, and you're sharing it on social. There's a lot of people that can put a post out every day on social, but it's just noise. You've got to cut through that.
Essentially, you know, there's a comment here about somebody who's doing this, trying to build their presence. They're creating content, but how do they increase the reach of that content, Sophie?
So you've got to be consistent. You know, I listened to something Stephen Bartlett was saying quite recently around when he brought his podcast out, and it had literally a handful of listeners or viewers in those early days because no one knew who he was. So everyone's got to start from somewhere. But I think there are a few hacks that can push things out faster. So, you know, is there anyone that you can collaborate with that's got a different, or perhaps hopefully a bigger audience to you? You know, can you tag them in something? And it's, you know, being careful not to just spam tag people in, because I get that a bit and it drives me nuts, where you've been tagged in a LinkedIn post with 20 other people and then you get notifications all day about posts that you didn't even want to be in the first place. So it's looking at ways that you can add value by collaborating with someone and then bring them into it. You know, things like doing a podcast, inviting great guests on, that is a brilliant way to increase engagement. So, you know, in my book here, I mentioned Sarah's in it. Katie Leeson, you know, she was always been pretty big on LinkedIn in particular. She was on it. Linda Plant from The Apprentice. You know, these are people that have got their own audience and their own engaged audiences. So by being able to collaborate with them, that gave me access to their audience as well. So yeah, I think things like that. If you can try and get published in a journal or a magazine or, you know, an online publication, that's really good, because you'll find that those sorts of things do really well on Google. So if you Google my name, for example, there's articles that I've been in years ago that still come up on the first couple of pages of Google.
Yeah, of course. And there's a question here from Ashley Charlton. Ashley's asking, you know, when's the right time to start building that in relation to your startup?
Yesterday. At the beginning, you know, and actually at the beginning is super interesting, because you're learning so much all the time, and there's ways of sharing that in an authentic and genuine way. So I don't think, you know, we'd probably all be waiting for the perfect time. It's you've got to just have a go, dip your toe in the water, and, you know, maybe look at people who you think are doing it well, who in your industry is well known. What sorts of things are they doing? Are there any things you can learn? Are there things you might do a bit differently, and taking from that and learning and giving it a go?
And then Dipper Candola's asked here, she's saying very similar story to yours, coming out to corporate to startups. She wants to spend more time on personal branding. So, but how does she find time with everything else she does?
Well, that's the challenge, and that's why there's a market for what we're offering as a business, because we know that business owners are busy developing and scaling the business, and they haven't, you know, they usually get that there's a value in you know, doing all this sort of promotion stuff, but that they haven't got the time to do it. So that's why it's a service. But I think, you know, when I was doing it for myself in those early days, I would do things like make really good use of time, almost dead time. So if I was traveling on the train, right, okay, I can prepare a few social media posts in my notes within my phone that I can post throughout the week. So I would do that. I might, have a day where I'm just focused on writing blogs or articles or whatever. But it's just looking for those opportunities to just fit things in and do batch content, really, just anything that you can, or you're looking for opportunities where you can repurpose things as well. And articles are great. You don't just have to share that once. You might, if it's evergreen content, you come back to that months later and reshare.
Of course. And a couple more questions before we finish. Charlie Nealon's, he mentions that he suffers terribly from imposter syndrome. How did you overcome this? Did you have imposter syndrome, or have you ever had it? Or
yeah, I mean, I think, when we were talking about that earlier, I was saying, I still have that all the time. I really do. And I think, there's some great tips about it in my second book, The Ambition Accelerator, from other people that have been through it. But I think it is trying to prepare yourself as much as possible in whatever situation you're going into. If you've got some real development areas within your business or within your own sort of skill set, it's trying to work on those so that you can become more confident, because I think that's an element of it. Unfortunately, I think it comes with age. One of those good things that comes with getting older is you do I think you just get to the point where you just care less what people think, and I think there's an element of that. But as well, it goes back to that whole surrounding yourself with great people. Especially business friends are the best, because they get the challenges and they get the concerns that you might have. So when you're having a bout of the old imposter coming at you, go and talk to someone. Go and have a coffee with someone that whose opinion you value, and take energy and confidence from spending time with great people.
So, final question, a sort of combined question, really. So, what do you think is the biggest mistake that you've seen happening in personal branding, and what sort of advice would you give to anybody thinking of going down this route of branding themselves?
I think at the risk of sounding a little bit repetitive, I think the biggest mistake I see is people just thinking it's about being on social media and being prolific and posting spammy content literally every day on social media. I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's about being consistent, but it's about the quality of the content that you're putting out there and having something to say that's meaningful, rather than just spouting off on LinkedIn or whatever platform you prefer. And
the one piece of advice you'd give anybody?
One piece of advice is choose one of those ideas that I said and go and implement it. So is it a podcast? Right, go and create a podcast, or writing those blogs, trying to get some speaking engagements. It would be pick one of those and try and master it.
Brilliant. Sophie, I don't know where the hours have gone. It's been an absolute...
I know, it's gone so fast.
And fast. You had to get up early this morning, but we'll never do that for you when you're on our show, I can assure you. Thank you, everybody, for turning up this morning. I hope you've learned a lot about personal branding, and you're going to be out there over the next few months selling yourself, your business, and hopefully everything you do so well. Join us next week when we have yet another guest to talk about their entrepreneurial journey. Sophie, thank you very much.